All right, so just whoops. All right, so hi everyone, welcome and thank you so much for being here today. My name is Mila and I'm here with my colleague Tristan. He's probably somewhere up on your video screen there. We are both students from the Nutrition Sciences program at the University of Ottawa, and we've been dietetic interns here at CHEO for the last 2.5 going on 3 months. And we're on our way to becoming registered dietitians, hopefully before the end of this year, which is really exciting. So our presentation today will be based on the theme for Nutrition Month 2021, as it has been developed by the Dietitians of Canada. So this theme focuses around challenging the notions of healthy eating, or another word other than notions that we can use is our preconceptions of healthy eating. So switch the slide, and this is us. So my name is Mila, and then Tristan. So what we'll talk about today. So the main idea that we hope you leave with here today is that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to healthy eating, and there never will be. So there's like no one magic recipe that will make everyone be super healthy and have them eating in the healthiest way possible. Nutrition is very individualized and varies tremendously between person to person, and we'll discover this based on 3 main factors that affect what we eat. So we describe these factors under 3 umbrella categories, and they are culture and food traditions, health conditions, and personal circumstances. So we're going to break down these categories, and at the end of the presentation, take all we learned and reevaluate our previous preconceived notions of healthy eating. So first of all, we know a lot of you are on your lunch break right now and are probably eating your lunches, but we'd like to know, what does healthy eating mean to you? So if anybody minds putting in the chat, some words that describe healthy eating for them, we would be really interested to know. And I can probably see the chat here. Yes, I can. Mindful eating, awesome. Everything in moderation, feeling energized. That's great. Okay, low sugar, low fat foods, okay. Diversity of ingredients, eating from Canada Food Guide. I'll give maybe 20 more seconds for if anyone wants to share. Eating for fuel, fun, and energy, staying away from processed foods, okay. Having some fresh fruit or vegetables every meal, okay. Low sodium, more fruits and veggies, okay. All right, so I'm seeing a good, a variety of things. So, some people are talking about it's important to them what type of food they put on their plate. Some people also focus on how food makes them feel, so giving them energy. And for fuel, fun, energy, yeah. So nutrition is not just about what we eat, but how it makes us feel and things that we do in relation to food. So we're going to talk about some of these things. So thank you all for sharing. This is great. So I've asked you, what does healthy eating mean to you? But now I'm going to ask Google, what does healthy eating mean to Google? So according to Google, healthy eating means lots of fruits and vegetables, a plate that is divided perfectly into sections, a lot of fresh foods, perfect plating. We have foods of all colors of the rainbow. We have no fun foods, so I'm thinking like chips or cupcakes or chocolate. We have a lot of whole foods, and I'm seeing salads on salads on salads. So that's what healthy eating means to Google. So based on the knowledge that Tristan and I have as nutrition students and as future dietitians, this is quite a rigid, specific, westernized, and even, let's just even say privileged way of eating. It lacks a lot of cultural diversity and economically accessible foods. So we're going to contradict Google on this because we don't believe that this is what all healthy eating looks like. It can definitely be one way to eat healthy, but is certainly not the only one. So before we get into it, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of nutrition and dietetics. So I'm sure that most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with the Canada Food Guide. So it's an evidence-based resource supported by a multitude of research conducted by many scientific disciplines, including nutrition sciences. So it gives an outline of how a general population can eat, like a general healthy population can eat, in a way to support their body's needs in nutrients, vitamins, minerals, and to reduce the risk of certain chronic diseases. But how did we get to the Canada Food Guide? Well, research has always focused on what humans need to eat to be healthy. So we started off with the discovery of the first vitamins, moved on to the analysis of macronutrients, what ratio and quantity we need to combat malnutrition and certain nutrient kind of focused diseases like scurvy. So this is all really great, and research has led to the development of resources such as the Canada Food Guide. Except research thought if they simply told people what to eat, that they would do it. And this is simply not the case because I'm sure we all understand, we all know, we've experienced it. It's really difficult to follow dietary guidelines to the letter. So why is this? Well, there are many factors that influence what we eat, and our food choices and variations may not always be accounted for by the Canada Food Guide or other images of healthy eating that we have. So what are these influencing factors? Well, they are the three umbrella categories that we discussed before. They are culture and food traditions, health conditions, and personal circumstances. So while the Canada Food Guide does set an outline to help us ensure that our body is getting an adequate amount of nutrients that we need, at the end of the day, it is still a guideline, and it doesn't dictate someone's food choices in their entirety. Nutrition is highly individualized, and two people's plates may not always look alike. So no matter what anyone tells you, there is not just one way to eat or one specific food that will allow you to eat in a way that is healthy for you, that fits your needs, lifestyle, is sustainable long-term, and is enjoyable. So this brings me all back to the point that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to healthy eating, and that there are a multitude of factors that influence what we put in our own healthy plates. So this first umbrella category we're going to talk about is culture and food traditions. So food is one of the only forms of universal communication. I think we all know we all need to eat food. It's just simply a matter of fact. So culture is often one of the reasons that we see variations of the healthy plate. So we often associate certain countries or cultures to specific foods. You know, the stereotypical examples are spaghetti in Italy and sushi in Japan. But these are obviously just the tip of the iceberg, and every culture offers an enormous variety of foods that will meet the physical needs, values, beliefs of the people that keep it alive. So when we compare to other cultures, these foods may be very different or have their resemblances. So, you know, what's considered edible in some parts of the world might just be considered inedible in others. So the foods people choose, how they eat it, with who they eat it with, how they cook it, how they preserve their food is all very important to food culture and will influence what their healthy plate looks like. And especially in a multicultural country like Canada, we are surrounded by an immense variety of food culture and diversity. So let's just take a look at some examples of how culture can affect the healthy plate, or a healthy plate, because there's not just one healthy plate, there's many. All right, so types of foods. So types of foods that people eat in various cultures will of course depend on what's available through agriculture, industrial production, and importation. The types of foods also depend on what was consumed throughout history by the ancestors of people in that culture. And this has consequently helped shape that culture's existing food patterns. And Tristan has a really great example of this coming up later on to share with you all. Variation also depends on cultural beliefs and perceptions around certain food. Just one example I can think of is in Canada and the United States, eating horse meat is considered to be a food taboo, but in countries like Mexico and Belgium, it's actually considered to be a real delicacy. So if we look at images on the screen in front of you, we see a variety of colors, ingredients, methods of preparation, spices. Certainly a healthy plate is not in any ways limited by the types of foods that it can contain. Another factor surrounding culture is religion. So practicing or being part of a certain religion will influence food choices because there might be food restrictions. Some foods might have to be eaten in certain ways. Just for example, we know that those part of the Islamic faith may eat according to halal, which is foods permissible according to Islamic law, meaning that animals have to be raised, fed in specific ways, and foods like pork are not permitted. Similarly, kosher foods conform to Jewish dietary regulations, and that also tells you rules on like what foods can be consumed together at the same time, also like some certain types of food that you are allowed or not allowed to eat. So also many followers of Buddhism or Hinduism, even Jainism, are vegetarians and don't eat meat as part of their beliefs and customs. All right, so plate composition. So it's not only the types of foods that we eat that we kind of just talked about, but it's also the way that we present it. So a typical North American plate is what we see in the Canada Food Guide. It's a division of a circle into fractions. And while this plate does apply to many cultures around the world, we should also consider other forms. So just take a look on the screen. We have some examples here for you. We have the traditional Korean plate, which is a bunch of different smaller plates shared between an entire table. We have the Japanese plate, which is sort of a bit more rectangular, and then it has lots of little plates inside of it. And then of course we see the Western plate and a traditional Indian plate as well. Utensils, going on to utensils. So what we eat with equally has a place in how we consume our healthy plate. So many of us use forks, knives, or spoons, but many of us may also use chopsticks or even our hands. And the way we use our utensils also comes with its own set of rules and customs depending on the culture. Something interesting, we might even use food as a way to consume our food, such as naan in Indian cuisine or injera, which is a flatbread in Ethiopian cuisine. So we've seen a couple ways how culture can affect what and how we eat, but maybe it would help if we looked a little bit at some real life examples. So let's look at this first one, Ramadan. So those practicing the Islamic faith may participate in Ramadan once a year, which is a month-long abstinence of food or drink during daylight hours between sunrise and sunset. So this act of fasting is part of the values taught by this religion and reminds Muslims to be grateful, thankful, and to remind them of the less fortunate. So maybe this might be a place where people see a problem. Doesn't healthy eating mean that we should not be eating late at night? Like we shouldn't consume, and I say, quote, calories at night. So shouldn't we only eat during the day? So although a typical vision of healthy eating might include eating the majority of your nutrition during the day, during Ramadan, healthy eating for a Muslim person may mean only eating very early in the morning or late at night. But by limiting physical activity during the day and by eating balanced meals and keeping hydrated when breaking fast, this can still very much be a healthy eating reality. Another thing we can talk about is breakfast. So I know at least when I go online, I go on Pinterest or Instagram or any other social media, I see oatmeal bowls, smoothies, whole wheat toast, eggs, and fruit for breakfast. So I think to myself, isn't this what a healthy breakfast is? Shouldn't this be my healthy plate all the time? And it definitely doesn't have to be, because just take a look at the traditional Japanese breakfast. It's something that's quite unique, something that many people in Canada and North America may consider for lunch or for dinner. It's very common to see miso soup, steamed rice, grilled fish, vegetables, and this meal is very balanced, provides a variety of nutrients from all the different food groups, and it can be an excellent healthy plate example, despite perhaps its non-typical appearance. So you've all been listening to me talk for a little while, and I will let Tristan have his turn, and I'll pass on the mic to him. So he'll give you a really great example of how a traditional Aboriginal diet, shaped by its ancestors and the challenging conditions they lived in, has shaped this culture's healthy plate.
Hello, hello. So listed here under each nutrient column, please click. We can see the main contributors in a modern North American diet. It would seem probably catastrophic if we were to suddenly exclude all these foods. Please click for drama. Look at that. Okay. So next slide. So what if someone ate like this? If we were to live without them, we would probably be concerned about deficiencies and their expressions such as scurvy, osteoporosis, etc. Perhaps most striking of all, how would we get our vitamin C without vegetables or fruit? Next slide. So I'm sure most of us are familiar with the New Canadian Food Guide and the recommendation half your plate should be fruits and vegetables. Please click. So of course, this plate model was designed with a lot of scientific backing. The main targets of this plate model are prevention of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and chronic disease and cancers that can be reduced with higher fiber and antioxidant intake. So these conditions are in fact among Canada's most prevalent and most expensive diseases. So it makes sense that we've adopted this model. If we look at the traditional diet that I shall soon reveal, please click. It's more of a food group division, be more appropriate just to answer your question for healthy fats. The comparison here is with the modern North American diet. So it's not contradicting or undermining the current recommendations of our food guide, but it does provide perspective. So here we have two diets which are completely different, but both nutritionally complete and achieve similar outcomes, which are to maintain good health, and somehow are both associated with reduced prevalence of the same conditions. So next slide. And the diet I was actually describing was the traditional Inuit diet. Next slide. So going back to our nutrients of concern, this is how traditional Inuit get their nutrients in. Vitamin A is ensured by consumption of hunted animal liver, liver being the most concentrated food source of vitamin A in the world. Vitamin C, quite interestingly, is acquired from the traditional food called muktuk, which is dried whale blubber with skin. And you may be wondering how this animal product can contain vitamin C, as we get all our vitamin C from fruits and vegetables. So most animals actually produce their own vitamin C, because think about it, vitamin C is required for the hydroxylation of proline, which becomes a structural component of collagen in epithelial tissue like skin. So any animals with skin and other epithelial tissue that don't eat fruit and vegetables or other sources of vitamin C, so think cat, dog, tiger, whales, have to produce their own vitamin C. And humans lost that ability of biosynthesis somewhere in evolution. But anyway, whales concentrate a relatively high amount of vitamin C in their skin, which is why Inuit wouldn't get scurvy. As for calcium, they would get some in fish bones, bone broth, but it's still technically a calcium deficient diet. Interesting fact, so genetic adaptations in vitamin D metabolism found in Inuit populations could explain a more efficient use of dietary calcium. So next slide. So why mention it? It's just to challenge our idea of a healthy plate. Many cultures have very different plates that don't necessarily line up with our food guide or other beliefs. The Canadian Food Guide is not a rule. It is, as it's called, a guide, which can sometimes be helpful. Here's a really important point. The cultural foods, knowledge, and traditions are valuable. There are reasons why cultures have thrived throughout history, and it's not that they followed the Canadian Food Guide or the Mediterranean diet or anything else. So knowledge and practices developed over the course of many generations, like eating whale skin to prevent scurvy is a great example of that, is traditional knowledge at work. So it's great to question the validity of everything we do, to be cautious, to want to improve, but it's not okay to dismiss traditional knowledge and practices just because they're traditional. Next slide.
All right. So just to conclude our section on culture and food traditions, there's a phrase I'd really love to share with everyone that I think, one, is super catchy, and two, really important to remember, especially when we live in a multicultural country like Canada and in our current day and age. And that phrase is, "Don't yuck my yum." So according to Urban Dictionary, it means, do not say that my food tastes bad and do not judge what I am eating. Food is something really tied to our identities, and saying that a food is yucky or weird could be parallel to racism or othering. So just for example, a classmate at your child's school has a meal that smells different, or a coworker has a snack that looks different to you. And it's okay, of course, that there are these differences and that you notice them. The problem is when people disproportionately focus on how different a food is, especially if the difference is perceived as being something as negative. So it can promote stereotypes, feed bias, and marginalize certain cultural groups. So the way we talk about food really matters. It's important to normalize and celebrate these foods and talk in a way that will uplift other cultures and people. All right, so now we're going to talk about our next umbrella category, which is health conditions. And Tristan, I'll hand the mic to you.
Okay. So health conditions can change the appearance of our meals, sometimes in more obvious ways than others. So next slide. So nutrition is personalized, and that's a cool concept. So we can have two clients that are given recommendations that are literally opposite. So person one, reduce intakes of fats, limit sodium, include low energy, high fiber snacks. Person two, increase intake of fats, add high energy food where we can, ensure good sodium intake. So it's kind of nonsense or hard to understand if we don't have a bigger picture. Please click. So person one, for example, could have hypertension, hyperlipidemia, insulin resistance. Person two, cystic fibrosis. So they both have a plan that's adapted to their own needs. Next slide. Health status affects food tolerance and our ability to consume foods. So for example, dysphagia can make certain foods difficult and even dangerous to consume. And this may require texture modification. So for example, food can be pureed. Some people require complementary enteral nutrition or supplementation. Nutrient absorption, utilization, and loss. I have an example of each here. So like cystic fibrosis reduces nutrient absorption, diarrhea induces loss of nutrients, phenylketonuria affects phenylalanine utilization. Medication can have an impact on all three of these aspects. There are also certain food constituents that can aggravate pre-existing conditions, which may lead to food substitution or limitation depending on the situation. And there's also food medication interactions like the infamous grapefruit and its phenocoumarins. And last one, nutrient needs. So for example, recovery from an eating disorder, especially long-term, much higher nutrient needs, or most physical traumas also require more of virtually every nutrient. So next slide. So choices can also be influenced by food intolerances. Usually limiting the food is sufficient. Indulgence is a dilemma in most cases. And okay, so for allergies, obviously allergies generally require total restriction and can eliminate some food options.
All right, thank you, Tristan. And the next section we're going to look at is the last umbrella category is personal circumstances, which is otherwise known as circumstances of life that can affect a healthy plate. So we're going to look at a bunch of different factors today. And of course, we're no way limited to all these factors. There's many, many things I'm sure you're learning that are affecting a healthy plate, but these are just some that we thought would be interesting to share with you today. All right, so the first sort of personal circumstance that can affect a healthy plate is having an intellectual or a developmental disability. So by definition, an IDD, which are these, that's the abbreviation I'll use, are disorders usually present at birth and are characterized by problems of intellectual functioning, adaptive behavior, and or physical impairments. So just some examples can be autism spectrum disorder, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, and so on. And approximately 0.5 to 1% of the Canadian population is affected, which is quite a considerable number when you think about it. So there are different factors that can affect the nutrition of a person with an IDD. Just for an example, oral aversion and restricted food repertoire. Just for example, we know that children on the autism spectrum very often struggle with sensory processing, under or overreaction to certain smells, tastes, textures, or sounds. And this can result in aversions to certain food textures and foods. So of course, limiting the types of foods that they are able to have. Dysphagia, as Tristan previously mentioned, certain individuals may struggle to swallow, require texture modification, such as a pureed or minced diet, thickened liquids, even oral nutrition supplements like Ensure or Boost, again, perhaps texture modified. Also, some individuals may require mealtime assistance, ranging from food preparation to being fed the food directly. Polypharmacy, so taking multiple medications at one time, again relating to health conditions. Taking many medications might result in side effects that affect nutrition, such as loss or increase in appetite, gastrointestinal symptoms, dry mouth, changes in taste, like a metallic taste in their mouth. Along the same lines, we're going to talk about having a physical disability, so how that affects nutrition. So by definition, a physical disability is a limitation of a person's physical functioning, mobility, dexterity, or stamina. Just some examples might include spinal cord injury, multiple sclerosis, amputation, auditory or visual disabilities. And the factors that influence nutrition are not just relating to the physical disability itself, but also to the societally created structures that surround these individuals. So speaking of mobility, so some individuals may be unable to walk, drive, or access public transport, making trips to the grocery store a real challenge or even impossible. Grocery stores themselves are often not adapted for wheelchair use or mobility aids. Even in a person's own home, there's standardized utilities such as the countertop or the oven or the stove might not be adapted for their use and therefore limit mobility around meal preparation and overall independence around food. Fatigue, chronic pain might make cooking and meal preparation a lower priority or very difficult for some because it does involve considerable effort and lots of energy to complete. Again, requiring assistance, individuals may require assistance from another person, again, perhaps limiting their independence around food preparation and food choices, even more so if an individual is living in a community residence. And food insecurity, something we're going to talk about more in depth coming up really soon, but we know that individuals with disabilities in general. So not just physical disability, here we're also talking about intellectual and developmental disabilities. They are less likely to be employed than those without disabilities, and this can affect financial status. And we know that lack of financial means to purchase food is yet another barrier to nutrition. So we're going to discuss food insecurity coming up really soon. But first of all, I'm going to give a quick example of perhaps how a real life example of how having a physical disability, such as a spinal cord injury and being a wheelchair user, could affect a healthy plate. So it is possible that such an individual may rely on more ready-made or frozen meals due to challenges accessing the grocery store and preparing meals in a standard rental house or apartment. So while the Canada Food Guide does encourage people to cook at home, make their own meals, and even though ready-made meals may often be perceived as being unhealthy, this type of healthy plate can still give balance. Like eating pre-prepared or ready-made meals can still give lots of balance and provide all the necessary nutrients from a variety of different food groups, but also fit that person's personal circumstance. All right, so we said we'd talk about household food insecurity. So it is a very real reality for many Canadians, with rates of household food insecurity being even higher with the onset of COVID-19. By definition, it means having an inadequate or insecure access to food due to financial constraints. So based on data from 2017-2018, Statistics Canada has estimated that 1 in 8 households experiences food insecurity, amounting to about 4.4 million Canadians, with the highest prevalence of food insecurity being in Northern Canadian territories. None of it is at the top, with 57% of the population experiencing food insecurity. Not surprisingly, this is associated with increased nutritional vulnerability and increased risk for certain chronic diseases and mental health problems. Households on social insurance that rely on a senior outcome, individuals with disabilities, and newcomers to Canada are just some groups that are at a particular risk. Of course, we don't exclude people not part of these groups. We just know that these groups do tend to be more at risk. And of course, it's very obvious to see that living with food insecurity has its effects on nutrition, as purchasing food might be primarily based on price or using a food bank. People may be forced to forego pleasure and preference for the sake of convenience and price. Eating a more constrained and restricted diet, much stress, and even social exclusion relating to food. Just for example, people may be labeled by negative stereotypes. Others may think that they don't know how to eat healthy, or they don't have the skills to eat healthy, which is entirely untrue because research has shown that there's very little difference between insecure and secure households concerning food preparation and cooking knowledge. Food availability. So this is something very similar to household food insecurity, and the two very often go hand in hand. So the difference is that food availability refers to food that is physically available in a certain area for purchase and consumption. So even though someone may be able to financially access food, physically it is not there for them to purchase. So there are many parts of Canada that we define as being a food desert, neighborhoods where residents have very little or no access to stores and restaurants providing healthy and affordable foods. And people living in these neighborhoods will very often have their nutrition affected. I mean, I'm sure that that's quite clear. So just for example, they might be limited to fast food restaurants and convenience stores. Stores will lack fresh produce, and foods that are available will be more costly. So we previously mentioned that household food insecurity rates are highest in Northern Canadian territories. And it's also in these areas we must note a very high prevalence of food deserts, just due to the relative remoteness and isolation of some communities, which result in a higher cost of living, coupled with high cost to ship nutritious foods. It makes the situation a very difficult reality for many communities and individuals and families. So along the same lines, we're going to jump back to food insecurity. We have to note actually that there is a considerable difference in household food insecurity rates between racial and cultural groups. In fact, the highest rates of food insecurity are found among households where respondents have identified as being Indigenous or Black, according to a recent Proof study. The study was called Proof, conducted by the University of Toronto. It is shown that households who have identified as Black have 0.56 times more likely, are 3.56 times more likely to experience household food insecurity, and 1.88 times more likely even when we adjust for factors such as income, education, and household makeup. All right, so the last sort of factor we're going to talk about in the personal circumstances category is time and food literacy. So time is something I believe that all of us can, we can relate and understand that the amount of time that we have to put into food procurement and food preparation is going to affect our nutrition. So we can think of some things that affect our time, but some things that we came up with were working long hours, having an irregular schedule, doing shift work, being a single parent family, being a student. So maybe these things might affect time a bit more, but in general, we understand that time is precious to everyone and our time will affect our nutrition. And then the very final factor is food literacy, which is the knowledge of food and nutrition, including self-efficacy and confidence around food preparation and food decisions. And food literacy itself may be affected by a person's education, their literacy skills in reading and writing, socioeconomic status, cultural group, household environment, and so on. All right, so we're gonna just give two more real life examples of perhaps how personal circumstances can affect a real life healthy plate. So, okay, let's think back to what Google told us at the very beginning of this presentation. So healthy eating apparently means eating lots of fresh whole foods, especially fruits and vegetables. However, with someone who lives with household food insecurity, eating whole fresh foods is very much probably going to be a luxury and one that they are unfortunately not able to afford. So more processed foods, such as in cans or frozen, may be a more financially accessible alternative, as these items do tend to be less costly and discounted, and they have a longer shelf life. So although canned fruit, maybe a can of beans and a glass of milk, might not exactly fit with this ideal image of a healthy plate, it just might be a more realistic image for someone living with household food insecurity. So this meal can still be balanced, well-rounded, provide all the nutrients that this person requires. We know for sure that canned and frozen fruits and vegetables are very comparable in overall nutrient content compared to their fresh counterparts. Another example on the lines of food availability. So for someone living in a food desert, such as many people in Nunavut, the Yukon, and Northwest Territories, fresh foods just might not be available, or if they are available, they're very expensive and simply not affordable. So you can just take a look at some images we put on the screen. These are real life prices of fresh foods found in a grocery store in Nunavut. So a bag of grapes for $29.19, so going on $30, which I think if we saw that in Ottawa, it would be absolutely outrageous price for a bag of grapes. 1 pound of strawberries for $14.39, again, exceptionally high price. So how is someone in this community with prices like these supposed to make that luscious, fresh food dish full of fruits and vegetables like Google said that they should eat to be healthy? So similar to the example we gave before, someone with limited physical access to fresh food may also rely on more convenient, less perishable, or less costly foods. So this could include more processed foods with longer shelf lives. So although processed foods, they do often get a bad reputation for being high in sodium and high in fat. It just might be a worthy trade-off to have these foods if the food that the person's eating will meet their nutrient needs and their food desires, but still fit their life circumstances. So it'll be financially sustainable, it'll be available in the area that they live, and so on. All right, so let's reevaluate what it means to eat healthy, and I'm going to pass the mic to Tristan.
Hello, thanks for the mic. Next slide, please. Okay, so eat for nutrition and pleasure. And I calculated these stats myself. Numbers don't lie, right? Patties are 25% yummy. Next slide. So it's something that's easy to forget, and I'm sure everyone would agree, like life's all about happiness and quality of life. And yes, proper nutrition is necessary for health, which in turn plays a critical role in quality of life and happiness. But enjoyment is necessary for happiness too, right? So why would we sacrifice happiness, enjoyment, and satisfaction for a theoretical gain in health when we know happiness is also necessary for health? So it's a bi-directional relationship. So fun foods aren't shameful. They're actually an investment towards both our immediate and long-term health. So enjoy. Okay, section here, addressing common food fears. Why? So we thought it'd be important to add this part. The theme for Nutrition Month is all about breaking down myths and preconceived notions about nutrition. And food fears are generally preconceived notions that are harmful by causing fear and limiting food variety. So I'm going to do my best to tackle a few that I've heard recently. And someone who struggled a bit with food fears as a teenager, I hope someone else can find this helpful. So next one. Concern number one, dairy is actually bad for bone health. Calcium isn't absorbed, it acidifies blood. These are things that I've heard. Next slide. So evidence against the myth that the calcium isn't absorbed, the bioavailability of calcium from milk is about 30%. Bok choy is considered highly bioavailable source at 50%. However, milk has approximately twice the calcium content as per volume, meaning milk is still technically one of the best sources of bioavailable calcium. About the blood pH is very tightly regulated by various mechanisms and buffering systems. So any blood pH alteration has immediate repercussions. Research has failed to show any systemic pH alteration by diet. And a possible source of confusion maybe is urine pH that can be affected by diet, but is not representative of systemic or blood pH. I've also come across a few articles comparing dairy intake between America. So among the highest consumers of dairy with relatively high rates of osteoporosis, to rural China, a group that consumes virtually no dairy and has much lower rates of osteoporosis. So of course, this may seem distressing and it seems like evidence that the dairy is to blame. However, calcium intake is just one factor in bone health. People of rural China are generally more active than Americans, and physical activity is actually essential for building and preserving bone mass. Beyond that, the standard American diet has little magnesium compared to rural China's diet, whose high magnesium content can be attributed to regular intake of vegetables, seafood, and tofu, which is actually traditionally prepared in magnesium chloride-rich brine. So dairy is not to blame for that. It's most likely other lifestyle factors and lack of food variety. Next slide. So dairy can be a positive factor in bone health, but so is general nutrition and physical activity. So that's the truth part. Okay. Next one. So this one's pretty present. Conventional agriculture is basically unsafe or has problems because of the pesticides and is inferior. So let's start with the latter. Next slide. Here's what we know. Organic is on average 1.5 to 3 times as expensive as conventional. The trade-off is a trend in slightly increased polyphenols, which are mostly antioxidants, and slightly increased mineral content. So that much is confirmed by studies. It's also generally more ecologically friendly as there's less pesticide use. That being said, allowed pesticide residue has never been associated to any health issue, either chronic or acute. However, avoiding vegetables, so for example, eating an insufficient amount of vegetables because those available aren't organic, does have both immediate and long-term negative effects that are backed by mountains of research. So if you do still have trouble with knowing that there are trace amounts of pesticides on our vegetables, we can just watch our vegetables, as we should already be doing anyway. Take comfort in the fact that studies have shown washing with just water removes the majority of residue on crops. And pesticides are generally water soluble, so that makes sense. By doing this, we remove the majority of trace amounts. So we're left with just a minority of a trace, really. And ultimately, both conventional and organic offer the same health benefits. And note that certain values that are slightly increased in organic don't necessarily relate to any tangible benefit, though they could in theory. So next slide. Okay. So essentially, GMOs, the genetically modified organisms, are bad and unnatural. Yes, they're unnatural, but so is medication, vaccines, Netflix, and Crocs. So I wouldn't stress about that part. Many argue that they aren't bad, and I agree with these people. The common modifications are listed here. So pest and environmental resistance, virus resistance, and nutritional fortification. These modifications here have been done with positive intentions in mind. So for example, vitamin A deficiency, last time I checked, is still one of the leading causes of preventable blindness in the world. So with vitamin A producing rice, we can potentially save millions from severe vitamin A deficiency and consequent blindness and immunodeficiency. The only controversial one I can think of is Roundup resistance as a genetic modification, which can encourage overuse of the pesticide Roundup and cause reduction in the local plant diversity and is harmful for local pollinators. So in conclusion, just being against GMOs for environmental reasons is partly justified, but they can't all be grouped together. So you don't have to look for that label GMO-free on products. Next slide. The last one here, fear of ingredients with complex or long names. So complexity of names and toxicity aren't correlated in any way. So the first three are just common vitamins added to food products. They're an easy counterexample to the philosophy that we should fear hard to pronounce ingredients. Fructooligosaccharides are naturally occurring fibers, often added to high fiber or fiber fortified foods. They are associated with health benefits like bowel regularity, lowering glycemic index of foods. Another related fear is that of preservatives, and I've listed 3 examples at the bottom. And I can't stress this enough. Like not using preservatives is much safer than not using them. Pathogenic microorganism overgrowth can be very dangerous, and there's a reason why we use them. So, for example, 1 gram of most preservatives, much more than we would usually use, except for like plain salt and lactic acid as exceptions. We can foresee potential abdominal pain, maybe. So 1 gram of like botulism toxin from bacteria is easily enough to kill 1 million people. So most bacterial toxins lie somewhere between the two in terms of toxicity. That is somewhere between causing stomach pain and being able to kill us. Next slide. So more on preservatives. Let's take a look at erythorbic acid as an example of feared preservative. So lowest dose that causes any observable effect. So they call it the no observed adverse effect level. In studies was 650 milligrams per kilogram of body weight per day. And it caused weight loss. So no genotoxicity, no carcinogenic activity. So to be safe, that amount is divided by 100. So that's called the uncertainty factor. That means that the upper allowed limit in foods is 1% of the concentration that caused the first adverse effect in studies. And considering the content in hot dogs, one of the foods with the most, you'd have to eat 1 kilogram of hot dogs in a day just to reach that 1%. So 100 kilograms of hot dogs consumed in 1 day, and we'd expect an adverse effect from erythorbic acid. If you're eating 100 kilograms of hot dogs in 1 day, the erythorbic acid is probably the least of your concerns. Any preservatives that we should avoid? None come to mind, really. So more on that. Erythorbic acid is actually an antioxidant much stronger than vitamin C. A lot of preservatives are in fact antioxidants, so it's pretty common. So think ascorbates, so those are vitamin C derivatives, or tocopherols, which are vitamin E derivatives. Technically makes cured meats safer by reducing the nitrosamine formation, and it prevents growth of dangerous microorganisms. So yeah, approved. Next slide. So any other food fears, you can always ask a dietitian. If you can, do your own research with reputable sources. And it's never wrong to be cautious. It can be wrong to assume.
All right, everyone, so that concludes our presentation. But before we answer any questions, we'd just like to leave you with some final remarks. So as was the topic of our presentation today, we sincerely hope that you've left with one idea, and that is that there is no one perfect way to eat and that there's no one size fits all approach to healthy eating. So everyone's plate is unique and shaped by cultural factors, health factors, personal circumstances. And although the topics we talked about today do provide a general idea of how aspects in our lives affect our nutrition, we are so in no way limited to them. Our plate is something that is individual, special, and exists to provide us with nutrients, energy, but also enjoyment and pleasure, something we should not be forgetting. So thank you again, everyone, for being here today. I would like to open the floor for 10 minutes of questions or so. So if you're able to stay, please feel welcome. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Mila. This was an excellent presentation.